The movie City of Water reflects a movement, now a very pronounced, broad-based movement. But the first inkling that I had that anything was going on was a call from a foundation saying, we're getting a lot of inquiries and a lot of applications from community groups all around the waterfront. Maybe you'll do a reconnaissance mission to figure out what's going on. 3 days later, I was leaving for a vacation. We were going to Venice. And so I sat in Venice on the Grand Canal, and I thought to myself, well, Venice is a city of water, but so too is New York, and I became intrigued by it. I came home and I took the assignment. I put together a team of terrific people, and we went out and started walking. We covered every inch of the New York City waterfront, some 720 miles. The waterfront had been filled up with piers, with storage sheds, and all that had changed. The moving the port to Port Elizabeth and Port Newark had left this landscape that was up for grabs. There was this opportunity, for the first time really since the Civil War, to reclaim and really redesign almost every inch of the New York City waterfront. But even as we were discovering the opportunity, the window was closing. It was disappearing even before New Yorkers realized it was there. So we planned this conference, and of course one of the things that we'd learned in the reconnaissance was that New York and New Jersey did not speak to one another, that they're separated historically and culturally and politically, and people in New Jersey wouldn't go to a conference in New York, and people in New York wouldn't have any idea about how to go to a conference in New Jersey. So we, using boats, did the conference in both states in one day. The most dramatic moment of the conference were the first 10 minutes. And we'd arranged for a boat to come to the Battery and pick up all the New York, about 450 people came to the conference and about 200 were from New York. And 10 minutes later, we were landing at the rail terminal at Liberty State Park, and they could still see over their shoulders where they had come from, and none of them had ever been there before. And it was so close you could almost reach out and touch lower Manhattan. And it was a real, wait a minute, because it had only taken 8 or 9 minutes to get there. The whole day was sort of filled with this amazement on people's part about how close things were when you connected things by water. We realized, well, we've got something here. It's kind of an alliance. We better come up with a name. We were sort of under the gun, and so we came up with the name Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance. Carter Kraft, who was really the real energy in this, set up an electric newsletter called Water Wire, and within 6 or 7 months of the original, maybe we should do a reconnaissance, we had a full-blown organization hosting forums, doing beach cleanups, working with community groups. It was then a project of the Municipal Art Societies. It became time for it to graduate into its own entity, which it is, and now we have our own board of directors, our own wonderful president, Roland Lewis, and it's growing and growing. I think there are over 300 organizations that are now part of the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance. The City of Water movie was basically made during 2005, 2006, and released in 2007. And at that time, the city had really no understanding of how important the working waterfront is. They just paved over the largest graving dock in New York Harbor to make way for a parking lot. And I think through a combination of reasons, but including the film, I think the city of New York has a very much improved set of responses now to the working waterfront. They understand, I think, in the government that you need places to repair tugs. You're not going to have the port we want unless you've left some room for these working aspects of the harbor. That's, I think, a really big improvement. If you think about the history, the modern history of New York and its waterfront, I think the most important moment is the construction of Battery Park City. And it's just absolutely wonderful, beautifully designed buildings, open spaces, public art, and the world's most perfect esplanade with the right paving, the right bench, the right lamp, the right tree. And I think for a long time, that's all we thought we had to do. Nobody ever dreamed that there would ever be any reason for a boat to land. And I can remember when they were doing the Williamsburg and Greenpoint rezoning, we had a meeting down with some of the staff at City Hall, And we pointed out to them that the way they were proposing to regulate the esplanade they were hoping to get built would make it impossible to land a boat there. And I remember one young guy saying, mystified, well, why would anybody ever want to land a boat in the East River? Well, I think today there's a much more sophisticated understanding of how vibrant waterfronts can be, and that it depends on not just having a place to look at the water, but a place to get on the water, a place to get off boats into a community, a place to fish, a place to have tour boats come. It's getting far livelier, and I think today some of those same agencies that didn't know what people were talking about, you know, back in '05 and '06 are themselves the leading proponents of good waterfront development. One of the wonderful ideas that was set forth in the movie back in 2005 and '06 was Bill Kornblum's idea about town docks. Why don't we have in each community a town dock, and boats can come in and they can go out, and you don't have a boat maybe, but you go down and have a cup of coffee. And that concept has actually taken hold. And one of the products of the Quadricentennial, a celebration of the 400th anniversary of the visit of Henry Hudson, is a beginning dock program. And so now there's matching money from New York State to build docks. And MWA is in fact working right now with the Parks Department here in the city to begin work on 2 dock projects. So we're very excited by this. It's a very tangible step towards reacquainting citizens with their birthright. In the period when I first got involved with the South Street Seaport, it's hard to imagine today, but the general strategy for Lower Manhattan was to tear everything down. In fact, been a quite wonderful plan done by 2 good architects, Conklin and Rossant, called the Lower Manhattan Plan in about 1966. And it called for saving City Hall and probably 1 or 2 other buildings and basically rebuilding all of Lower Manhattan. Around Fulton Street, the plan called for a big open plaza, which would have meant destroying all these wonderful historical buildings around the Fulton Market. And the founder of the Seaport, a wonderful guy named Peter Stanford, looked at that plan and he went up to City Hall. He said, why don't we let these wonderful Georgian buildings be the plaza? And we'll bring in ships and we'll reestablish the connections. And both the city and the civic community were initially uninterested, but by doing programming from the very beginning, bringing people to the one pier they could occasionally get entrance to, by having Pete Seeger bring his boat there, or by having concerts, people started to flow towards the water. In no time at all, Peter Stanford had enlisted some 5,000 people as members. That's an enormous amount. And the city was slow to act. It hadn't acted to preserve the historic buildings, and so the Seaport had to step in and buy some of these buildings to keep them from being knocked down. That gave the city time to come in and adopt the historic district. Ultimately, the Seaport assembled land, gave it to the city of New York. The city wrote a lease back to the Seaport. There was a little machine that was created to redevelop the area as retail, but have some of the profits go into maintaining the ships. Somewhere along the line, the city took the Seaport Museum out of the equation and leased directly to the Rouse Corporation, the failed shopping center that is there today. So this is a Humpty Dumpty that needs to be put back together. There was a symposium about a year and a half ago called Seaport Speaks, which brought together experts to sort of set a new course for the South Street Seaport. Thinking back as to how could the Seaport, such an unlikely idea, have possibly succeeded, it was in part due to what was starting to emerge in New York at that time, which was a backlash from citizens. This is after Penn Station, and citizens were beginning to question sort of the urban renewal ideas of the post-World War II governments. But you cannot discount Peter Stanford's own persuasive abilities. We were all sort of swept along by his vision, and the vision, I can still remember some of the writing, you know, where there was a sentence once about how the seaport would be a place where you could look up at the sunlit faces of Georgian buildings and peer down into the engine room of a working tug and understand a sense of work and the world. I mean, I'm pulling that out of 25 or 30 years ago, but there was power to these ideas, and those ideas captured people. When you think of it, here's this very dense urban population that we've created here in the last couple of hundred years, you know, the densest portions of North America, living side by side with this wonderful, pure estuary that is a breeding ground for birds and fish and wildlife of all kinds, and they're side by side and there's no contact. So this is an extraordinary opportunity here to bring urban populations into touch with nature. When I was growing up around New York, you'd be crazy to jump into the water. Now, you know, nobody kayaked. There was, you saw it from a bridge. You know, I remember when I was a kid, there was a movie about the Amazon River, and it shows these guys paddling along the Amazon River, and one of them puts his arm underneath the water and comes up, and it's all been eaten by piranhas. Well, that's what I actually thought would happen when I was a kid in the East River or the Hudson River. Today, we've got kids growing up learning to fish, learning to kayak, learning to row, learning to build boats. There's a high school, the maritime arts. Our population is getting back in touch with its birthright. It's really wonderful. You know, in the 19th century, people were as familiar with the tides as we are today with alternate side of the street parking. I mean, it was just one of the factors that determined daily urban life. I don't think there's very many people today that are keeping track of the tides, but I bet more will in the future.